Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are once again looking at another devblog for the next update of War Thunder. This is for the Nanchang Q-5, and the Nanchang Q-5 is going to be an attacker which is coming in for China at the 6th rank. So the highest rank for aviation in the game. It looks like China's getting a new toy, and you may see some similarities between this and some other vehicles in the game, such as the MiG-19 and the J6, and that's because, well, it was kind of based off of them. So looking at the history of this aircraft, basically the Chinese started production of the Shenyang J6, which is of course their copy or their license-built version of the MiG-19 in 1958. The PLA also issued an order to develop a ground attack version of the J6 in the same year. And by 1960, the design work on the aircraft had finished, but because of some political turmoil in the country at the time, caused the prototype construction and further developments to be delayed until the mid-1960s. But in June of 1965, the prototype of the aircraft would become known as the Nanchang Q-5. It first took to the skies for its maiden flight, and after further testing, the decision was to put the aircraft into production in 1969. And the first deliveries of the aircraft would begin, and did begin, in 1970. The Q-5 officially entered service in the Chinese Air Force in 1970, and around 100 of the aircraft of the early versions were built out of a total of around 1,300 aircraft of all the different variants. However, though, the later models continued service with the Chinese forces into the 2000s, and apart from the PLA, the Q-5 was also used by many other countries. It was exported to Bangladesh, Pakistan, Myanmar, North Korea, and also the Sudan. So overall, this plane has been highly used by a lot of nations, and I've got to say it is a looker. For me personally, when I have a look at this jet, I think it looks absolutely stunning. The model work so far that we've seen looks really nice, and also just in general, it is just a beautiful machine to look at. So since it is heavily based off the J6 or the MiG-19, it inherits a hell of a lot of the characteristics of the J6 that we already have in the game. The main thing that is similar is the two Liming-Wopen WP6 turbojet engines that generate up to 3,250 kgf in afterburning mode, and this means that this machine can reach a top speed of 1,210 kilometers per hour at sea level, which is pretty quick. So even though it's slower than the J6, the Q-5 makes up for it in the deficit in speed and being able to carry much more expanded secondary armament. So this really is, an attacker variant of the J6. So it loses some of its maneuverability, it loses some of its speed and acceleration, but it gains the usefulness back in different ways, such as the ordnance. Whether in-game that will actually be shown or not, because of course you've got to remember, when it comes to the ordnance, it's a little bit underwhelming. I'm not going to lie. So the first thing, though, is its standard armament is 223mm, which is completely fine. And also, they do get a lot more ammunition. They get 120 rounds per barrel, so that's 240 overall, since there's two guns on this. So it has a ton more than the J6's. So therefore, at least in my opinion, that's going to be a lot more useful in air-to-air combat, even though this thing, you probably won't get into a lot of air-to-air combat. Oh, sorry, it's not designed to. It probably will, but it's not designed to be that. But the main difference between the two machines is, as talked about, the Q-5 has a set of interesting pylons. It has 6 external pylons on the machine, and it also has an internal bomb bay, which is pretty cool. And you can see some of the pylons being used in this picture. So yeah, 6 external pylons, an internal bomb bay on the early modifications, and also these pylons mean that this machine can carry a bunch of different unguided rockets and also bombs which go up to 250 kilos. Now these bombs look very large in my opinion compared to what they're actually packing. You know, you're talking about only having 250 kilo bombs, and you know, you can compare that to other stuff such as, you know, the Phantom, which has obviously 1,000-pounders or 750s, or even the H-5, which will be before this machine, which has a 3,000 kilo bomb. This machine can carry up to 1,500 kilos worth of ordnance, and that's about it. You know, 1,500, so still half of the ordnance of something like the H-5, which is kind of sad. But you know, maybe some people will be able to use it in a ground striking way, probably in simulator to grind out the whole of the vehicle. But it is definitely, you know, more designed, this vehicle, around ground strike and also close air support missions at the higher tiers. The other thing to also mention, you know, about this vehicle is, even though it's slower, even though it's a little bit heavier, it should also have a little bit more armor on it, if I remember correctly, compared to the standard version of the J6, so at least it'll be a little bit more tanky. Whether that'll make any difference at all, I highly doubt it. But the main thing to talk about of this is obviously that extra ordnance. Now, even though it's not too impressive, it does finally give China an option at high tiers for a plane which does carry, you know, at least some kind of ordnance. It still isn't on the level of many other nations, you know, especially when you look at the bombers from a lot of other nations, whether it be stuff like the B-57 or, you know, the Canberras. The major issue that it seems like the Soviets and the Chinese are going to have going forward, and obviously the Japanese have this problem at an even greater extent, is that they went down the supersonic attacker way of living until a bit later on, you know, with stuff like the Su-25, which is much more long distance and not really comparable to this machine. But because of stuff like the Su-7 or the Su-7B in game and stuff like this, I'm not entirely sure they actually have a place in their desired role. Like, I don't actually think this machine is going to, like, change the meta or, you know, completely annihilate everything, because it just doesn't really have the capability to do so. Like, it has a few rockets, it has a few bombs, and that's really about it. It's nothing that's going to blow anything away. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have a ballistic bombing computer, it doesn't have a ballistic targeting computer, it has nothing like that. So what I actually think this plane is going to happen, it's not going to be that useful in ground forces. I mean, it'll be a nice addition, you know, to a lineup, but I think I'd still take the H-5 with the 3,000 kilo. What this is going to do is it's either going to make the F-84 easier to grind through, which will be lovely, or the H-5, because it should go in that part of the tree, so that's great. But also, it might also have the Su-7 syndrome. Now, what was the Su-7 syndrome? No longer the Su-7 syndrome, since it was changed. The Su-7B was added into the game at 9.7. The reason why, I think, is because Gagin thought that it would be used by many people as a ground attacker. And, you know, since it had limited ordnance, you know, even though it could go Mach 2, it would be able to be chased down, or, you know, it would be weighed down by its ordnance, and therefore when it goes back to base, people could clip it. The Su-7B, this did not happen. The Su-7B people just took out as a fighter, and the only thing that was really holding it back was the F-104s, because nothing else could catch the damn thing. So whenever you were playing these aerialistic battles between like 8.7 and 9.7, it just became a battle of, there was two separate battles going on. You had the 8.7s to 9.3s, which were fighting each other, and then you'd occasionally have the 9.7s in the form of the Su-7B and the F-104s milling about, you know, maybe they try and pick up some kills here and there. But you would have that battle, and then you'd have the 9-7 battle. And whoever won the 9-7 battle out of the Supersonics would then start being able to control the game if the pilot knew what they were doing. This is basically why the Su-7B and the F-104 both went up at the same time, because both of them were able to control the battle so well because of their speed, because of their acceleration, even though the Su-7 didn't get air-to-airs. Now, this machine here also doesn't get air-to-airs. It only gets ground-pounding ordnance, so you're stuck in a fighter capacity with those guns. But the 23s are pretty nice, and with that extended ammunition, if this thing gets added to the game at 9.3 and 9.7, and by the way, the Tiger right now, the F-11, that thing's sat at 9.0 for some reason. I definitely feel that, this could actually have one of those flash-in-the-pan moments in the sun as a fighter, because of its speed, because of its acceleration, and not entirely because of its ground-pounding capabilities. I think that's definitely going to be secondary, at least from the start, and then if there's a BR change later on, it'll probably be increased, and then nobody will play it anymore. But if it starts at something like 10.0 or 10.3, well, it can't be 10.3 because the J6 is 10.0, but let's say it starts off at like 10.0, this thing will be useless. But at 9.7, it might actually have a chance to carry a little bit because of the way that the matchmaking works in a realistic. I would like to use this thing against the Lightning, see which one comes out on top. I think it would be pretty fun to see. Overall, though, we'll have to see when it comes out what its actual ordnance looks like. Right now, it doesn't look good enough to even, shake a stick at, especially since there are better options in the Chinese tree. But as I said, it is a beautiful aircraft. I am hoping it has its time in the sun, and hopefully it will be soon. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Battling Bacon, Blackie, Chris Giltnane, Conte Baraka, Daniel Stanton, Elove Goat, Jay Wilt, Martinez, Trigger Hippie, Universe, Eugens Terry, and also I'm Devilish and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.